In the frozen wilderness, war veteran Noah Briggs opened his door to two shivering girls, sharing his last meal and unknowingly changing all their lives. Over the years, he became their protector, defying the ruthless landowner who wanted him gone. 21 years later, the girls now grown returned, carrying a gift that would leave Noah speechless and prove that one act of kindness can echo across a lifetime. Noah Briggs hadn't opened that door in 7 years, not since his family left, taking only their bags and leaving behind his mounted service rifle and a note in his wife's careful hand. "You love war more than us," on Christmas Eve. 1999. 3 sharp knocks cut through a howling blizzard, stirring something deep in him. Maybe it was the storm piling snow against the windows like the earth was trying to bury his sins. Maybe the half-empty bottle of Jack Daniels on the table, or maybe the desperate, heartbeat-like rhythm of the knock. Peering through ice-crusted glass, he saw 2 little girls, blue-lipped and holding hands. The older no more than 8 in an oversized coat, the younger about 5, clutching a glinting locket. The brand on the older girl's wrists, 187, told him these weren't just lost children. They were stolen. Before he realized it, his hand was on the door. The wind slammed into him as the older girl, eyes far too old for her age, whispered, "My sister's real sick and we ain't got nowhere else to go." For a moment, he thought of sending them away, but then the younger girl looked up with eyes that mirrored his grandson's, fevered and familiar. He stepped aside. Inside, the girls dripped melted snow onto the worn floor, scanning the sparse room as if memorizing it in case they had to run again. Mary's cough rattled like dried leaves in a can, tasting of copper and fear. Noah asked their names, Emma and Mary, and when Emma, chin high, declared her sister had done nothing wrong, he told her neither had she. Kneeling, joints aching, he asked if they were hungry, and Emma's nod nearly broke him. He split his last can of beans 3 ways, remembering how he'd survived Nam on less, but watching Mary scrape the can clean was harder to bear. As the storm raged, Noah told them about building the cabin for his family, a place meant to keep them safe, only to learn too late that families, like campfires, needed tending, and his had burned down to cold ash while he was off fighting other people's battles. Emma listened to his stories while Mary dozed against her shoulder, and sometime around midnight, when the wind finally started to settle, she told him theirs. Their mama had been beautiful once, Emma said. Worked the fields for a man named Crowder, who ran what folks called an orphanage, but what was really something else entirely. Mama had tried to keep them safe, tried to hide them when the inspectors came around, but Crowder always found a way to make her pay. "Mama said run," Emma whispered, her voice so quiet Noah had to lean in to hear her. "She said find the old soldier in the woods and tell him about the marks on our arms. She said ... she said you'd understand what they meant." Noah looked at that brand on Emma's wrist, again, C187, and felt something cold settle in his stomach. He'd seen marks like that before, in places where men did things to other people that shouldn't be done anywhere on God's green earth. Prison, camps, labor farms, places where human beings became inventory. "Where's your mama now?" he asked. Emma's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't let them fall. "Uncle Crowder says she's sleeping in the dirt now. Says that's what happens to women who don't mind their business." And that's when Mary started coughing again, harder this time, and when she pulled her hand away from her mouth, Noah saw the blood, dark drops on her pale palm, the same color as the stain on his conscience that no amount of whiskey could wash clean. Some men collect scars, you see. Others collect debts, but Crowder, he collected both. And Noah was about to learn that some debts, once you start paying them, never seem to get smaller. The next morning dawned clear and cold, the kind of winter day that makes everything look sharp and clean, like the world got wiped down with a wet cloth. Noah woke to find Emma already up, standing by the window with her arms wrapped around herself. watching the snow-covered forest like she expected demons to come crawling out from between the trees. "They'll come looking for us," she said when she noticed he was awake. Uncle Crowder don't like to lose his inventory. That word inventory hit Noah like a punch to the gut. These weren't children to Crowder. They were assets, property, things that generated income and could be replaced if they broke down or ran away. Noah had seen evil before, had fought it in jungles and rice paddies and places that didn't exist on any map the government would admit. But this was different. This was evil wrapped in a bow tie and a preacher's smile, the kind that built orphanages and collected donations and appeared in the local paper cutting ribbons at community fundraisers that he spent that morning teaching Emma how to whittle, sitting at his kitchen table with his old pocket knife and a piece of birch wood. His hands shook. They always shook now, but something about having a purpose, having someone to teach, made the tremors seem less noticeable. "Knives ain't for killing," he told her as she struggled to peel a long, clean shaving from the wood. "They're for carving your own damn fate." Emma was a quick learner, quicker than his own grandson had been on those rare occasions when Noah had tried to teach him something useful. Within an hour, she was making clean cuts, following the grain, understanding how wood wanted to split and working with it instead of fighting against it. "You're good at this," Noah said, and Emma's face lit up with something he hadn't seen before: pride. Pure, simple pride in doing something well. "Mama used to say I had clever fingers," Emma said, then her face darkened. "But Uncle Crowder said clever girls just cause trouble." Noah watched her work, this fierce little girl who'd been branded like livestock and taught to be ashamed of her own intelligence, and he felt something stirring in his chest that he'd thought was dead forever. Purpose. The feeling that maybe, just maybe, he had one more fight left in him. One more chance to get things right. But Crowder wasn't the type to let property walk away without consequences. Around noon, Noah heard the sound of truck tires crunching on gravel. He looked out the window and saw a black Ford pickup parked at the end of his driveway, 2 men in heavy coats standing beside it. They weren't making any effort to hide, just standing there, smoking cigarettes and staring at his cabin like they were appraising it for auction. "Emma," Noah said quietly, "take Mary upstairs to the loft. There's a loose board behind the old trunk. Pull it up, and you'll find a space big enough for both of you. Don't come down no matter what you hear, understand?" Emma nodded and gathered Mary in her arms, disappearing up the narrow stairs without a sound. The girl moved like smoke when she wanted to, Noah noticed. Probably a skill she'd learned the hard way. The knock came 5 minutes later. 3 sharp raps, just like the night before, but these weren't desperate. These were confident. The kind of knocks that came from men who were used to doors opening when they wanted them open. Noah answered with his old service revolver tucked into the back of his belt, hidden under his flannel shirt. Old habits. The man at his door was tall and thin, with the kind of pale skin that never saw honest work and eyes like chips of dirty ice. His companion was shorter, broader, with hands that looked like they knew their way around other people's pain. "Mr. Briggs?" the tall one said, and his voice was smooth as motor oil. "My name is Marcus Crowder. I believe you have something that belongs to me." Noah kept his face blank, a skill he'd learned in interrogation training and perfected during 30 years of marriage. "Don't know what you're talking about." Crowder smiled, and it was the kind of smile that made honest folks want to cross the street. "2 little girls, Mr. Briggs. They wandered away from my facility yesterday evening. I'm sure you understand children that young, out in this weather, it's dangerous. Their legal guardian is quite worried." "Ain't seen no children," Noah said. "Of course not," Crowder said, still smiling. "But you wouldn't mind if we took a look around, would you? Just to ease an old man's concerns?" Noah stepped into the doorway, blocking their view of his living room. "I would mind, actually. This is private property, and you ain't got no warrant." Crowder's smile never wavered, but something cold flickered behind his eyes. "Mr. Briggs." I'm trying to be reasonable here. These children are damaged goods, traumatized, difficult to place. But they're still worth something to the right people. People who aren't particular about paperwork or legal guardianship, if you understand my meaning. And Noah did understand. He understood that Crowder was telling him exactly what kind of monster he was, confident that Noah would be too afraid or too smart to do anything about it. Like I said, Noah repeated, ain't seen no children. The shorter man started to step forward, but Crowder held up a hand to stop him. That's fine, Mr. Briggs. We'll be in touch. He reached into his coat and pulled out a business card, holding it out to Noah. When you're ready to be reasonable. Noah didn't take the card. After a moment, Crowder dropped it on the porch and turned to leave. But before he reached his truck, he called back over his shoulder. Oh, and Mr. Briggs? That's a nice woodshed you've got there. Shame if something happened to it. Winter fires are so common this time of year. They drove away, but Noah knew they'd be back. Men like Crowder always came back. They couldn't stand the idea that something they considered theirs was beyond their reach. That night, Noah found himself in the loft, sitting beside the loose board where Emma and Mary had hidden. The space was barely big enough for two small children, lined with old blankets and smelling of dust and fear. How long were you up here? He asked Emma. 2 hours, she said. Mary fell asleep, but I stayed awake. I heard everything. Noah nodded. You did good, both of you. He's gonna come back, Emma said. It wasn't a question. Yeah, Noah said. He is. What are we gonna do? Noah looked at this 8-year-old girl who was asking questions no child should have to ask, making plans no child should have to make. And he thought about his own son, grown now and living somewhere in California with a family that had learned to get along just fine without Noah Briggs. He thought about all the battles he'd fought in places whose names he couldn't pronounce, for reasons he'd never fully understood. But this was different. This was a fight he could understand, a war with clear sides and a purpose that made sense. These two little girls, sleeping in his loft like birds in a nest, depending on a broken-down old soldier to keep them safe. This was worth fighting for. We're gonna make sure he can't hurt you anymore, Noah said. That's what we're gonna do. The next morning, Noah drove into town for the first time in months. White Pine wasn't much a main street with a grocery store, a diner, a post office, and a sheriff's department that consisted of one overworked deputy and a dog that spent most of its time sleeping on the front porch. But it was also a place where people knew each other, where gossip traveled faster than wildfire, and where secrets had a way of coming to light whether the secret keepers wanted them to or not. Noah's first stop was the diner, where he ordered coffee and listened to the conversations swirling around him. It didn't take long to learn that Marcus Crowder was something of a local celebrity, a successful businessman who'd taken over his father's farm and turned it into a model facility for troubled children. He donated to the church, sponsored the high school baseball team, and gave interviews to the county newspaper about the importance of helping disadvantaged youth find their way in life. He was also, according to the whispered conversations, Noah overheard, someone you didn't cross if you wanted to keep living peacefully in White Pine County. Heard old Jim Morrison tried to file a complaint about the noise coming from Crowder's place. One farmer muttered to another over eggs and bacon. Next thing you know, Jim's barn burned down, and the insurance company found reasons not to pay. And what about Sarah Chun? The other farmer replied. Asked too many questions about her nephew when he was staying out there. Next week, health department shuts down her restaurant for violations nobody'd ever seen before. Noah listened and learned, filing away every detail, every name, every story. By the time he finished his coffee, he had a clearer picture of what he was up against. Crowder wasn't just a predator, he was a predator with protection, with connections, with the kind of power that came from having dirt on the right people and money in the right pockets. But Noah had something Crowder didn't expect, nothing left. to lose. His next stop was the library, a small building that smelled of old books and dust motes dancing in afternoon sunlight. The librarian, a severe-looking woman with gray hair pulled back in a tight bun, looked surprised to see him. "Mr. Briggs," she said. "It's been a while." "Mrs. Patterson," Noah nodded. "I need to look at some old newspapers. Going back maybe 10, 15 years. She led him to the microfiche machine in the back corner, and for the next 3 hours, Noah scrolled through years of local news. Missing children reports, filed and forgotten. Accidents at the Crowder facility, explained away as the inevitable hazards of working with troubled youth. Obituaries for young people who died of pneumonia, or accidents, or mysterious illnesses. That seemed to strike with unusual frequency among Crowder's charges. And then he found it. A small item buried on page 6 of the county paper from March 1987. Local woman dies in farm accident. The photo was grainy, but Noah recognized the face immediately. It was Mary and Emma's mother, 12 years younger, but with the same dark eyes, the same stubborn chin. The article was brief. Margaret Sullivan, 19, had died when a piece of farm equipment malfunctioned. She was survived by no known family. Services were held at Crowder's facility, but what caught Noah's attention was the date of death, March 15th, and the date of birth listed in the obituary, September 3rd, 1967. Margaret Sullivan had died 3 days before her 20th birthday. And according to the birth dates, Noah had calculated for Emma and Mary. She'd given birth to Emma when she was only 11 years old. Noah sat back in his chair, feeling sick. The picture was becoming clearer, and it was uglier than he'd imagined. Margaret Sullivan hadn't been an employee at Crowder's facility. She'd been one of his victims. And Emma and Mary weren't just stolen children. They were second-generation victims, born into a nightmare they'd never had a chance to escape. Until now. That night, after the girls were asleep, Noah climbed up to his attic and pulled out a footlocker he hadn't opened in 15 years. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, were the tools of his former trade. Not just weapons, though there were those too. Maps, surveillance equipment, communication devices, everything a man might need if he was planning to conduct a private war. At the bottom of the footlocker, in a manila envelope yellow with age, he found what he was looking for, a ledger. Not his own, this one he'd taken from a North Vietnamese supply depot in 1968, thinking it might contain useful intelligence. It had, but not the kind his commanding officers were looking for. Instead, it contained names, dates, and transactions. Records of people sold, traded, and disposed of like inventory. It was written in Vietnamese, which Noah had learned to read during his 2 tours, and it had haunted his dreams for 30 years. But now, holding it in his hands, Noah realized it might be the key to understanding how Crowder operated. Predators were creatures of habit, and the methods used to traffic human beings didn't change much from one continent to another. He spent the night translating sections of the Vietnamese ledger, looking for patterns, for weaknesses, for anything that might help him understand his enemy better. And as dawn broke over the snow-covered forest, Noah Briggs began to formulate a plan. The war in Vietnam had ended in 1975, but for Noah, the real war was just beginning. 3 days later, while Emma and Mary were napping by the fireplace, Noah heard the sound of truck engines coming up his driveway. Not one truck this time, 3. Crowder was done being subtle. Noah watched from his window as 6 men climbed out of the vehicles, and he recognized the type immediately. Not local boys looking to make a quick buck. These were professionals, the kind of men who did ugly work for ugly money and slept just fine at night. The knock came, but this time Noah didn't answer. Instead, he called out from behind his door. "What do you want, Crowder?" "To talk, Mr. Briggs, nothing more. But I'd prefer to do it face to face. We're talking now." "Fine," Crowder's voice was patient, almost amused. "I know you have the girls, Mr. Briggs. I know you think you're protecting them. But what you don't understand is that these children belong to me. Legally, morally, and in every way that matters. They don't belong to nobody, Noah called back. They're human beings, are they? Crowder asked, and Noah could hear the smile in his voice. Have you looked at their medical records, Mr. Briggs? Have you seen what they've been exposed to? The experiments we've conducted to improve their ... durability? Noah felt Emma's small hand slip into his. She'd woken up and come downstairs without him noticing, moving with that ghost-quiet step of hers. Her eyes were wide with fear, but also with a kind of grim determination that reminded him of soldiers he'd known in the war. We've been developing new agricultural techniques, Crowder continued from outside, testing the effects of various chemical combinations on human subjects. The girls have been invaluable in that research. But I'm afraid the long-term effects are ... significant. Without proper medical care, they won't live to see adulthood. Emma squeezed Noah's hand tighter, and he saw understanding in her eyes. She knew what Crowder was saying. She'd always known. So you see, Mr. Briggs, you're not saving them. You're simply choosing how they die. Quickly from the poisons already in their systems, or slowly, from whatever diseases you might catch from them. You're lying, Noah said. But even as he spoke, he remembered Mary's cough, the blood on her palm, the rash he'd noticed on both girls' arms. Am I? Crowder asked. Look at the older girl's fingernails, Mr. Briggs. See how they're starting to yellow? That's liver damage. And the younger one's breathing, notice how shallow it's become. That's her lungs beginning to fail. Noah looked down at Emma, and she looked back at him with eyes that held too much knowledge for an 8-year-old. She nodded, confirming what they both already knew. But it doesn't have to end that way, Crowder continued. I have treatments. Experimental, but effective. I can keep them alive, Mr. Briggs, but only if they come back with me. Only if they resume their place in my research program. What kind of research? Noah asked, though he was afraid he already knew. The kind that will revolutionize agriculture, Crowder said. The kind that will feed millions of people someday. The kind that requires sacrifice from a few for the benefit of many. Emma tugged on Noah's hand, and when he looked down at her, she mouthed a single word. Layer. And Noah believed her. He'd heard enough lies from men in positions of power to recognize the sound. Crowder wasn't trying to save the world. He was just another predator who'd learned to dress up his evil in the language of progress and necessity. Here's what's going to happen, Mr. Briggs, Crowder said. And now the patience was gone from his voice, replaced by something harder and more honest. You're going to open this door and hand over my property. If you do it now, I'll let you live. If you make me take them, well, this is a remote area. Accidents happen. Noah looked at Emma, at this brave little girl who'd been through hell and somehow still had fight left in her. He thought about Mary upstairs, coughing blood into tissues while she slept. He thought about Margaret Sullivan, dead at 19, with secrets buried alongside her. And he made his choice. No, Noah said. There was a moment of silence from outside. Then Crowder spoke again, and his voice was different now. Colder, more honest. Burn it down, he said. Noah heard footsteps moving away from the door, heard the sound of liquid being poured against the walls of his cabin. Gasoline. They were going to burn him out, and they didn't much care if he and the girls made it out alive. But Noah Briggs hadn't survived 2 tours in Vietnam by being unprepared for a fight. Emma, he said quietly, remember what I taught you about the knife? She nodded. Double quotes. Good. Now listen carefully. In about 30 seconds, these men are going to try to burn down my house. But what they don't know is that I've been expecting this. You see that door over there, the one that leads to the root cellar? Emma looked where he was pointing. There's a tunnel that runs from the cellar to the old mine shaft about 50 yards into the woods. I dug it myself, back when I was still worried about the Russians coming. You take Mary and you go down there, And you don't come out until you hear me call for you, understand? What about you? Noah smiled, and for the first time in years, it was a real smile. I'm gonna remind these boys why they shouldn't mess with old soldiers. Emma hesitated for just a moment, then nodded and ran upstairs to get Mary. Noah heard her whispering urgently, heard Mary's sleepy protests, heard their footsteps on the stairs as they headed for the cellar door. Outside, Noah could smell smoke beginning to curl up from the base of his cabin walls. Crowder's men had lit their fires and stepped back to watch the show. They probably expected him to come running out, hands up, begging for mercy. They were about to learn that Noah Briggs had never begged for anything in his life, and he wasn't about to start now. Noah went to his bedroom and opened the closet, pushing aside old coats and boxes until he found what he was looking for: a green duffel bag that smelled like gun oil and memories. Inside were the tools he'd hoped never to use again, but had never quite been able to throw away. The M16 was cleaned and oiled, even after all these years. Old habits died hard. The ammunition was still good. He'd checked it religiously every 6 months, part of the same routine that kept his survival instincts sharp, even when everything else was falling apart. But the rifle wasn't what he reached for first. Instead, he pulled out a small canvas pouch filled with items that looked harmless enough to civilian eyes, but would have made his old platoon sergeant grin with appreciation. Improvised explosive devices, booby traps, the kind of nasty surprises that had kept him alive in the jungle when Charlie was trying to kill him and the brass was trying to get him killed. Noah had about 2 minutes before the fire spread enough to make his cabin uninhabitable. He used every second. The first device went under the front porch, triggered by a tripwire that would activate when someone stepped on the second board from the left. The second went in the woodshed, where Crowder's men had thoughtfully stored several gallons of gasoline they'd been planning to use on the cabin. The third, and most important, went in the old oak tree that overlooked his driveway. It wasn't designed to kill. Noah wasn't ready to cross that line just yet, but it would sure as hell announce that the war had officially begun. By the time Noah finished his preparations, smoke was pouring through the floorboards, and the temperature inside the cabin was rising fast. He grabbed a few essential items: water, ammunition, first aid supplies, and headed for the root cellar. Emma and Mary were waiting for him at the entrance to the tunnel, huddled together like refugees from a bombing raid, which Noah supposed they were. Is the house gonna burn down? Mary asked, and her voice was small and scared. Maybe, Noah said, but houses can be rebuilt, people can't. He led them through the tunnel, a narrow passage he'd dug by hand over the course of 6 months, back when the Cold War was hot and every veteran with half a brain was preparing for the possibility that the next war would be fought on American soil. The tunnel came out in the old mine shaft, a played-out copper mine that had been abandoned since the 1940s. Noah had reinforced the entrance and stocked it with supplies, enough food and water for a week, medical supplies, communications equipment, and weapons. "This is our fort," he told the girls. "This is where we make our stand." From their vantage point in the mine shaft, they could see Noah's cabin burning in the distance. Crowder's men were standing around their trucks, watching the flames and probably congratulating themselves on a job well done. That's when the first explosion went off. The tripwire under the porch caught one of Crowder's men as he stepped forward to get a better view of the fire. The device wasn't powerful enough to kill him, but it was more than enough to send him flying backward into his companions, screaming and bleeding from a dozen small wounds. The second explosion came 30 seconds later, when someone's cigarette ignited the gasoline vapors in the woodshed. This one was bigger, loud enough to rattle windows in town 5 miles away, bright enough to light up the forest like daybreak. And the third explosion, the one Noah was most proud of, came when Crowder himself walked under the oak tree, probably trying to get a better view of what was happening to his carefully planned operation. The device in the tree wasn't powerful enough to hurt him, but it was loud enough to make him wet himself and bright enough to temporarily blind him. More importantly, it released a cloud of red smoke that would mark him as a target for anyone with a rifle and a clear line of sight, which Noah happened to have. He put the first bullet into the ground 6 inches from Crowder's left foot. The second bullet took out the headlight on the nearest truck. The third shattered the driver's side window of the second truck. By the fourth shot, Crowder and his men were running for cover, shouting and pointing in all directions, trying to figure out where the shots were coming from. Noah had learned patience in the jungle. He could wait all day if he had to, picking his targets, making every shot count, letting fear do most of the work for him. These weren't soldiers he was fighting, they were bullies and cowards who'd gotten used to their victims being helpless children. But Emma and Mary weren't helpless anymore. They had a guardian now, and he'd learned his trade in the most unforgiving school on earth. The siege lasted until dawn. Crowder's men tried rushing the mine shaft twice, but Noah had positioned himself well with clear lines of fire and plenty of ammunition. He didn't kill anyone, though there were moments when the temptation was strong. But he made sure they understood that any attempt to reach the girls would be expensive. By sunrise, 2 of Crowder's men were wounded badly enough to need medical attention, and the rest were beginning to realize that they weren't dealing with some broken-down old drunk hiding in a cabin. They were fighting a war veteran who'd turned his piece of forest into a killing ground, and they were losing. That's when Sheriff Bradley arrived. Tom Bradley was a good man, Noah knew, but he was also a practical one. He'd been sheriff of White Pine County for 20 years, and he'd learned to pick his battles carefully. Crowder had money and influence, and Noah Briggs was just a crazy old vet who'd finally snapped and started shooting at people. At least that's how it would look in the official report. "Noah," Bradley called out from behind his patrol car. "This is Sheriff Bradley. I need you to put down your weapon and come out peacefully." "Can't do that, Tom," Noah called back. "These men tried to burn my house down with children inside." "That's not how Mr. Crowder tells it," Bradley replied. "He says you kidnapped 2 of his wards. Says you've been holding them against their will." Noah looked at Emma and Mary, huddled together in the depths of the mine shaft. Emma was holding her sister protectively, but her eyes were fixed on Noah with something that might have been trust. "Tom," Noah called out, "you ever wonder why so many children die out at Crowder's place? You ever ask yourself why the state inspectors never seemed to find any problems there?" There was a long silence from Bradley's position. "That's not your concern, Noah. My concern is that you've got 2 scared little girls in there, and you're putting them in danger." "The only danger these girls are in comes from Crowder," Noah shouted back. "Ask him about Margaret Sullivan. Ask him about C-187. Another silence. Longer this time. "I don't know what you're talking about, Noah, but I know you're scaring these children. Just let them go, and we can work this out." Noah realized then that Bradley wasn't going to listen. Maybe he was on Crowder's payroll, or maybe he was just too scared to ask the right questions. Either way, he wasn't going to help. But Emma was tugging on Noah's sleeve, trying to get his attention. "What is it, honey?" "I know where Uncle Crowder keeps his ledger," she whispered. "The real one. The one with all the names and numbers." Noah stared at her. "You know about the ledger?" Emma nodded. "He made us clean his office sometimes. I can read, and I remember things. I know where he hides the book that has all the children's names in it. The ones who are still alive and the ones who aren't." Noah felt something cold settle in his stomach. "How many names are in that book, Emma?" "Hundreds," she said, "going back years and years. Some of the names have red marks next to them." "What do the red marks mean?" Emma looked at him with those 2 old eyes, and Noah already knew the answer before she spoke. "They mean those children don't need food anymore." Noah closed his eyes and tried to think. Outside, He could hear Crowder and Bradley talking in low voices, probably planning their next move. He had maybe an hour before they brought in reinforcements, maybe less. But if Emma was telling the truth, and Noah believed she was, then that ledger contained evidence of crimes that went far beyond kidnapping and child labor. It was proof of systematic murder, of a decades-long operation that had been grinding up children and spitting out their bones while the whole county looked the other way. "Emma," Noah said quietly, "if I could get into Crowder's office, could you tell me exactly where to find this ledger?" She nodded without hesitation. "It's in a safe behind the big painting of the farm. The combination is 1872, the year his Daddy started the business." Noah stared at her. "How do you know the combination?" "I watched him open it," Emma said simply. "Uncle Crowder thinks children are stupid. He doesn't know we pay attention to everything." Mary coughed again, harder this time, and when she pulled her hand away from her mouth, there was more blood than before. Whatever Crowder had done to these children, whatever poison he'd put in their systems, it was getting worse. "Listen to me, both of you," Noah said, taking their small hands in his weathered ones. "I'm going to get that ledger. I'm going to make sure the whole world knows what Crowder's been doing. But first, I need to get you somewhere safe." "We're safe here," Emma said, but Noah could hear the fear underneath her brave words. "For now," Noah agreed, "but not for long. Crowder's got money and friends, and I'm just one old soldier with a rifle. But I know someone who might help us. Someone who's been asking the right questions for a long time." He was thinking of Dr. Sarah Chun, the woman whose restaurant had been shut down after she'd asked too many questions about her nephew. She'd lost her business, but she hadn't stopped asking questions. And she had connections outside White Pine County, friends in the state capital who might listen if they heard the right story. But first, he had to get the girls to her. The tunnel system Noah had built extended beyond just the mine shaft. During his paranoid years after the war, he dug a network of passages that connected to the old storm drainage system that ran under the county road. It would take them about 2 miles underground, but they could come up right behind Chun's house, on the outskirts of town. "We're going on a little trip," Noah told the girls. "Underground like moles. Think you can handle that?" Mary nodded bravely, though Noah could see she was scared. Emma just squeezed his hand tighter. "What about Uncle Crowder?" Emma asked. "What if he follows us?" "He's going to be too busy dealing with other problems," Noah said grimly. He led them deeper into the tunnel system, using the small flashlight he kept in his emergency kit to light their way. The passages were narrow and low. He dug them to be defensible, not comfortable, and the girls had to crawl in places where even Noah had to duck. But they made good time, and within an hour they were crouched beneath the storm drain that opened behind Dr. Chun's property. Noah could see her house through the metal grating, a small ranch-style home with a carefully tended garden that was now buried under 2 feet of snow. "Stay here," Noah whispered to the girls. "I'm going to make sure it's safe." He climbed up through the storm drain and approached the house carefully, using skills he'd learned in jungle warfare to move without being seen or heard. Chun was home. He could see lights in the kitchen and the flicker of a television in the living room, but he also saw something else: fresh tire tracks in her driveway. Someone had been here recently, and from the size of the tracks, it was a large vehicle. Possibly a truck. Noah cursed under his breath. Crowder was thorough. He had to give him that. While Noah had been pinned down in the mine shaft, Crowder had been thinking ahead, anticipating where he might try to take the girls. Noah crept closer to the house and peered through the kitchen window. Dr. Chen was sitting at her kitchen table, but she wasn't alone. A large man in a dark coat was sitting across from her, and even from outside, Noah could see that the conversation wasn't friendly. Chun looked terrified. Noah backed away from the window and returned to the storm drain where Emma and Mary were. "Waiting. Change of plans," he whispered. Dr. Chun's got company. Emma's eyes widened with understanding. Uncle Crowder's men? Looks like it. Noah thought quickly. Chun had been his best hope for getting the girls to safety, but now that option was gone. Crowder had anticipated the move and countered it before. Noah could even make it, but maybe that gave Noah an opportunity he hadn't expected. Emma, he said, how many men does Crowder usually keep at the farm? 6 or 7, she said, but some of them left with him today. Noah nodded. If Crowder had men watching Chun and more men still at the mine shaft with Sheriff Bradley, that meant the farm might be less heavily guarded than usual. I'm going to get that ledger, Noah said. Tonight, while Crowder's busy looking for us in all the wrong places. We're coming with you, Emma said immediately. No, Noah said. It's too dangerous. It's dangerous everywhere, Emma replied, and her voice held that steel-hard determination that reminded Noah why she'd survived as long as she had. Besides, you need us. You don't know the layout of the farm, and you don't know where all the guards are. We do. Noah started to argue, but Mary tugged on his sleeve. Please, mister, she said in her small, hoarse voice. Don't leave us alone again. We've been alone too much already. And Noah's heart broke a little bit more, because he recognized the truth in her words. These children had been abandoned by everyone who should have protected them. Parents, authorities. The whole damn system had failed them. He wasn't going to be just another adult who walked away when things got dangerous. All right, he said, but we do this my way. You follow my orders exactly, no questions asked. Understand? Both girls nodded. Good. Now let's go steal ourselves some evidence. The Crowder farm sat on 200 acres of prime agricultural land, about 10 miles outside White Pine, connected to the county road by a long gravel driveway that was lined with bare oak trees like sentinels. The main house was an old Victorian structure that had been painted white so many times, it looked like it was wearing thick makeup to hide its age, but it was the outbuildings that told the real story. Barracks-style dormitories, a large barn. That had been converted into workshops and several smaller structures that Emma told Noah were used for special projects. That's where they keep the sick ones, she whispered as they crouched in the tree line, studying the farm through Noah's binoculars, the ones who can't work anymore. Noah adjusted the focus and saw what she meant. One of the smaller buildings had bars on the windows and a heavy padlock on the door. It looked less like a dormitory and more like a prison. How many children are here now? Noah asked. Maybe 30, Emma said. Used to be more, but, well, you know. Noah did know, and the knowledge sat in his stomach like a stone. He counted 3 guards patrolling the grounds, which was fewer than he'd expected. Crowder really had pulled most of his men away to deal with the situation at the mine shaft. That was good. It meant Noah's diversion was working, but it also meant he was running out of time. Once Crowder realized the girls weren't at the mine shaft, he'd be back here with reinforcements. The office is in the main house, Emma said. 2nd floor, 3rd door on the right. But you have to be careful, the stairs creak real bad on them. 5th and 7th steps. Noah smiled despite himself. You've done this before. Sometimes we had to sneak around at night, Emma said, looking for food or medicine for the sick ones. Uncle Crowder didn't like it when we tried to help each other, but we did it anyway. Noah felt that familiar surge of pride and anger that came with meeting someone who refused to be broken, no matter what the world threw at them. These girls had more courage in their small bodies than most grown men he'd known. They waited until the guards completed their patrol circuit, then moved out of the trees and across the open ground toward the main house. Noah had taught the girls basic infantry movement, low, fast, and quiet, and they took to it like they'd been born for it. Maybe they had been. The back door of the house was locked, but locks had never been much of an obstacle for Noah. 2 minutes with a bent paperclip and they were inside, standing in a kitchen that smelled of industrial. disinfectant, and fear. The house was quiet except for the sound of a television playing somewhere upstairs. Noah motioned for the girls to stay close and started toward the staircase, stepping carefully to avoid the creaky boards Emma had warned him about. The hallway upstairs was lined with photographs, pictures of Crowder with local politicians, newspaper clippings about his charitable work, awards from various community organizations. The whole display was designed to showcase a pillar of the community, a man who dedicated his life to helping unfortunate children. It made Noah want to put his fist through every frame. The office was exactly where Emma had said it would be. Noah slipped inside and closed the door behind them, then used his flashlight to examine the room. It was expensively furnished, with dark wood furniture and leather-bound books that probably hadn't been opened in years. The painting Emma had mentioned hung behind a massive oak desk, a pastoral scene of the farm in its early days, when it had actually been used for agriculture instead of human trafficking. Noah moved the painting aside and found the safe exactly where Emma had said it would be. The combination 1872 worked on the first try. Inside the safe were stacks of cash, several legal documents, and 3 ledgers bound in black leather. Noah opened the first ledger and felt his blood turn to ice. It was exactly what Emma had described, the catalog of human misery stretching back nearly 20 years. Names, ages, dates of arrival, work assignments, medical experiments, and final dispositions. The red marks Emma had mentioned were scattered throughout the pages like drops of blood, each one representing a child who would never go home again. Margaret Sullivan's name was there, along with dozens of others. Children who'd been bought, sold, used up, and discarded like broken tools. But it was the most recent entries that made Noah's hands shake with rage. Emma Crowder, not Sullivan, as Noah had assumed. Crowder had been listing her as his legal ward, his property. Mary Crowder, same last name, same claim of ownership. And at the bottom of the most recent page, in Crowder's careful handwriting, both subjects showing advanced symptoms. Recommend termination before evidence becomes problematic. Noah showed the entry to Emma, and he watched her small face harden with an anger that belonged to someone much older. "He was going to kill us," she whispered. "Not anymore," Noah said, carefully removing all 3 ledgers from the safe. "These books are going to put him away forever." That's when they heard the sound of trucks coming up the gravel driveway. Noah cursed and moved to the window. 3 vehicles were approaching the house, their headlights cutting through the darkness like searchlights. Crowder had figured out where they were, and he was coming home with reinforcements. "Back door," Noah said, but Emma shook her head. "They'll have men there too," she said. "Uncle Crowder always covers all the exits," Noah thought quickly. They were trapped on the 2nd floor of a house that was about to be surrounded by armed men who had no interest in taking prisoners. The ledgers in his hands contained enough evidence to destroy Crowder's operation and probably send him to death row, but only if they survived long enough to get them to the authorities. "Is there another way out?" Noah asked. Emma nodded toward the window. "There's a trellis that goes down to the rose garden, but it's old and might not hold all 3 of us." Noah looked at the wooden latticework outside the window. It was sturdy enough for a child, maybe even strong enough for 2 children, but it would never support his weight. "You and Mary are going down that trellis," he said. "Take the ledgers and head for the storm drain where we came from. Follow it back to the mine shaft and wait for me there." "What about you?" Emma asked. Noah smiled grimly and checked his rifle. "I'm going to buy you some time." "No," Emma said, and her voice was fierce. "We don't leave people behind. That's what Uncle Crowder does. That's not what families do." And there it was, the word Noah hadn't dared to think, much less speak aloud. Family. That's what they'd become, these 2 damaged girls and 1 broken-down soldier. A family forged in fire and held together by the simple decision to protect each other, no matter what. "Emma," Noah said gently, Sometimes families have to make hard choices. Sometimes one person has to. He was interrupted by the sound of the front door being kicked open downstairs. Heavy footsteps echoed through the house, and Noah could hear Crowder's voice directing his men to search every room. Emma grabbed the ledgers and moved toward the window. But before she climbed out, she turned back to Noah. "Thank you," she said, "for sharing your beans, for teaching me about knives, for not letting him take us back." Noah felt his throat tighten. "You're welcome, sweetheart. Will you come find us?" Mary asked, and her small voice was full of hope that Noah wasn't sure he could fulfill. "I'll try," he said honestly. "I'll sure as hell try." Emma helped Mary out onto the trellis, then followed her. Noah watched them climb down carefully, their small forms disappearing into the shadows of the garden below. When he was sure they were safely away from the house, he turned his attention to the more immediate problem of staying alive long enough to matter. The footsteps were getting closer. Noah could hear Crowder's men checking each room systematically, working their way toward the office. He had maybe 2 minutes before they reached him. Noah positioned himself behind the heavy oak desk and checked his ammunition. He had enough for a good fight, but not enough for a long one. He was going to have to make every shot count and hope that the sound of gunfire would draw attention from people who might ask awkward questions about why a respected community leader was conducting a military assault on his own property. The door handle turned slowly. Noah held his breath, finger on the trigger, waiting for the first target to present itself. The door opened and 3 men entered the room, weapons drawn. They moved like professionals, covering each other's movements, checking corners and blind spots. But they made one critical mistake. They assumed Noah was trying to hide. Instead, he was hunting. Noah's first shot took down the lead man before he even realized he was in danger. The second shot caught the man behind him in the shoulder, spinning him around and sending his weapon flying. The third man managed to get off a wild shot that splintered the bookshelf behind Noah's head before Noah's return fire put him on the floor. The gunfight lasted less than 30 seconds, but it felt like hours. When the smoke cleared, Noah was still alive and functional, though his ears were ringing from the gunshots in the enclosed space. But he could hear more footsteps coming up the stairs, and voices shouting instructions. Crowder had brought more men than Noah had bullets. Time for Plan B. Noah had noticed the fireplace in Crowder's office when they first entered the room. It was an old Victorian design, with a flue that connected to the main chimney system. More importantly, it was wide enough for a man to climb through if he was desperate enough and didn't mind getting dirty. Noah grabbed a handful of papers from Crowder's desk, insurance policies, legal documents, anything that looked important, and stuffed them into his jacket. Evidence was evidence, even if it wasn't as damning as the ledgers Emma had taken. Then he squeezed into the fireplace and started climbing. The chimney was narrow, dark, and full of decades of soot and debris. Noah's shoulders scraped against the brick walls as he worked his way upward, following the dim light that marked the opening to the roof. His knees and elbows were bleeding by the time he reached the top, but he was alive and free. From the rooftop, Noah could see the chaos his little war had created. Crowder's men were running around like ants from a kicked hill, shouting orders and pointing weapons at shadows. Police sirens were wailing in the distance. Someone in town had heard the gunfire and called for help. But most importantly, Noah could see 2 small figures moving through the darkness toward the tree line. Emma and Mary had made it safely away from the house, and they were carrying the evidence that would destroy Crowder's operation forever. Noah smiled and started looking for a way down from the roof that wouldn't involve breaking his neck. Next few hours passed in a blur of gunfire, sirens, and confusion. By the time the sun rose over White Pine County, Marcus Crowder was in handcuffs, his farm was crawling with state investigators, and 37 children who'd been written off as lost causes were being transported to hospitals and safe houses. Noah himself was in the county jail, charged with kidnapping, arson, assault with a deadly weapon, and about a dozen other crimes that would probably keep him behind bars for the rest of his life. But he didn't care, because Emma and Mary were safe. Girls had made it to the storm drain system and followed Noah's instructions to wait at the mine shaft. When the state police found them 12 hours later, they were huddled together under Noah's old army blanket, clutching the ledgers that would become the foundation of the largest child trafficking prosecution in state history. Sheriff Bradley had been arrested along with Crowder. Turned out he'd been taking payments to look the other way for almost 15 years, and his bank records told a story that no amount of denial could overcome. Dr. Chun, once she was freed from Crowder's men, became the girl's temporary guardian and their most fierce advocate. She'd been collecting evidence against Crowder for years, waiting for someone with enough credibility to help her bring it to light. The ledgers provided that credibility and more. 3 weeks later, Noah was sitting in his jail cell when a guard came to tell him he had visitors. He expected to see his court-appointed lawyer, or maybe a reporter looking for an exclusive story about the crazy vet who brought down a child trafficking ring. Instead, he found Emma and Mary waiting for him in the visitor's room. They looked different, cleaner, healthier, wearing new clothes that actually fit. Mary's cough was already improving thanks to proper medical care, and the rash on both girls' arms was beginning to fade, but the biggest change was in their eyes. The wariness was still there, that would probably never completely go away, but it was mixed now with something Noah hadn't seen before. Hope. The lady lawyer says you might not go to prison, Emma said without preamble. She says what you did was justified, because you were protecting us. Maybe, Noah said. But even if I do go to prison, it was worth it. You two are safe, and that's what matters. Mary reached across the table and took his hand in her small one. We don't want you to go to prison, she said. We want you to come live with us. Noah felt his throat tighten. Sweetheart, I don't think that's possible. I'm not exactly father material, and you need— Dr. Chun says she wants to adopt us, Emma interrupted. But she also says we can choose who we want to visit us, who we want to be part of our family. She looked at him with those serious 8-year-old eyes that had seen too much and survived too much to be fooled by empty promises or pretty lies. We choose you, she said simply. And for the first time in 30 years, Noah Briggs felt like he was home. The trial took 8 months, and when it was over, Marcus Crowder was sentenced to death by lethal injection. His entire operation was dismantled, his assets were seized and distributed to his victims, and his name became synonymous with the kind of evil that decent people prefer to pretend doesn't exist. Noah served 18 months in minimum security prison, and when he was released, he found Emma and Mary waiting for him outside the gates with Dr. Chun and a welcome home banner they'd made themselves. They'd bought a house together, a real house with bedrooms for everyone and a big kitchen where they could cook meals as a family. Noah taught the girls how to fish and hunt and whittle, and they taught him how to laugh again, how to sleep without nightmares, how to believe that sometimes the good guys actually win. 21 years later, on Christmas Eve 2020, Noah Briggs was supposed to die. At least, that's what the newspaper obituary said. Local veteran dies peacefully at home, surrounded by family. But the obituary didn't tell the whole story, because it couldn't. The real story was too strange, too wonderful, too impossible for most people to believe. The truth was that Noah did die that night, in a sense. The bitter, broken man who'd been drinking himself to death in a cabin in the woods. That version of Noah Briggs was gone forever. What remained was something better. A father, a grandfather, a man who'd learned that the most important battles aren't fought in distant jungles or foreign countries, but right here at home, in the quiet moments when someone needs you to be strong, needs you to be brave, needs you to choose love over fear. Emma had become a district attorney, specializing in crimes against children. Her office wall was covered with photos of kids she'd helped save, Kids who'd been given second chances because someone had refused to. Look the other way. Mary had become a doctor, working at the children's hospital in the state capital. She still carried scars from her time at Crowder's farm, but she'd turned those scars into something beautiful, a deep empathy for suffering and unshakable determination to heal. And on Christmas Eve 2020, they both came home to the little house where they'd learned what family really meant. Noah was 91 years old, confined to a wheelchair, but still sharp as the knife he'd taught Emma to use all those years ago. His hands shook more now, and his voice was weaker, but his eyes still held that fierce protectiveness that had saved two little girls from a monster. "Tell us the story, Grandpa," Mary's daughter asked. She was 8 years old, the same age Emma had been on that snowy Christmas Eve when everything changed. "Which story?" Noah asked, though he already knew the answer. "The story about the night you saved Mama and Aunt Mary," the little girl said. "The story about the beans." So Noah told the story again, the same way he'd told it dozens of times before. He told them about the knock in the storm, about the brand on Emma's wrist, about the ledger that held so much pain and the courage it took to turn that pain into justice. He told them about the choice every person has to make when they see someone in need, whether to look the other way or step forward and say, "Not on my watch." And when the story was finished, when the children were tucked into bed and the house was quiet, Emma and Mary sat with Noah on the front porch, watching snow fall through the circle of light cast by their porch lamp. "Thank you," Emma said, just like she had that night in Crowder's office, "for everything." Noah smiled and squeezed her hand. "Thank you for knocking on my door. What do you think would have happened if we hadn't?" Mary asked. "If we'd gone somewhere else, or if you'd turned us away?" Noah thought about it for a moment, then shook his head. "Doesn't matter," he said. "What matters is that you did knock and I did answer. The rest is just details." But late that night, after everyone had gone to bed, Noah sat by his window and looked out at the forest where his old cabin used to stand. He thought about all the roads not taken, all the choices that had led to this moment. He thought about his first family, the one he'd lost to his own demons and stubbornness. He thought about the children he'd failed to save in Vietnam, the ones whose names he still remembered in the darkest hours of the night. And he thought about the two little girls who'd saved him just as much as he'd saved them, who'd taught an old soldier that it's never too late to come home from the war. The newspaper got it wrong, you see. Noah Briggs didn't die on Christmas Eve, 2020. That was the night he finally learned how to live. Some folks say that if you drive past the old Crowder farm on certain nights when the wind is just right and the moon is dark, you can still hear children playing in the fields where so much pain once lived. Not the ghosts of the ones who died there, but the laughter of the ones who lived, who grew up and had families of their own and raised their children to believe that monsters can be defeated and that sometimes, just sometimes, the good guys win. And if you happen to be driving through White Pine County on Christmas Eve, and you see an old house with warm lights in every window and the sound of family laughter spilling out into the snow, you might want to slow down and remember this story. Remember that evil exists in this world, but so does good. Remember that sometimes the people who look the most broken are really just waiting for a reason to be strong again. And remember that family isn't always about blood. Sometimes it's about the choice to stand together when the storm comes, to share your last can of beans with someone who needs it more than you do, and to never, ever give up on the idea that love can triumph over hate. Because Noah Briggs was just an old soldier with shaky hands and too many ghosts, but he was also the man who answered the door on Christmas Eve, 1999, when two little girls needed someone to believe in miracles, and that made all the difference.